At 39 years old, Eamon believed his life was a testament to quiet stability. He earned, according to the W-2 from Trinity Field Services, a respectable $72,400 a year as a mid-level logistics manager. He lived in a restored 1920s craftsman home in Fort Worth's Mistletoe Heights, a neighborhood of old trees and proud, settled families. He had been married to Aria for 8 years, a woman whose beauty still made the air in a room feel thin. It was a life built of tangible things: the worn leather of his work boots, the hum of the refrigerator, the scent of coffee at 5:15 a.m. He thought this foundation was made of stone. He had no idea he was living in a house of cards, and a sharp wind was coming. The moment it all fell apart was a Tuesday, October 17th at 7:42 p.m. Rain slicked the windows, blurring the autumn streetlights into long, hazy streaks. It was the kind of weather that made a warm house feel like a sanctuary. Eamon had just finished cleaning the kitchen after dinner, the scent of lemon dish soap hanging in the air. Aria walked in, not in the comfortable lounge clothes she usually wore at home, but in a sharp, black $1,900 helmet lang blazer and dark jeans that looked like they had been tailored to her body. She was holding a sleek, cream-colored leather portfolio that he'd never seen before. It probably cost more than his monthly truck payment. She didn't look at him. She placed the portfolio on the gleaming $4,000 quartz countertop he had installed himself 2 summers ago. The sound was a soft, definitive thud. "Eamon, we need to talk," she said. Her voice was flat, stripped of the warmth he was accustomed to. It was the voice she used with contractors or incompetent waiters. He dried his hands on a dish towel. His hands were calloused, the knuckles slightly scarred from years of working with tools and machinery. He looked at her, at the perfect arch of her brows, the deep brown skin of her face that seemed to glow even in the dim kitchen light, and the intricate pattern of the Senegalese twists that fell over her shoulders. She was breathtaking, and she was a stranger. "What's wrong, Aria?" he asked, his own voice low and steady. She finally met his eyes. There was no sadness there, no conflict. There was only a cool, polished resolve, like a piece of sea glass worn smooth of all its sharp edges. "This isn't working," she said. "It hasn't been working for a very long time." Eamon felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He had thought things were fine. Not perfect, not the breathless romance of their first few years, but comfortable, solid. "What are you talking about?" She laughed, a short, sharp sound with no humor in it. "Oh, Eamon, please don't play dumb. Look at us. Look at you." She gestured vaguely at him, at his simple cotton t-shirt and worn jeans. "You come home every day smelling of diesel and dirt. You're happy with your projects, your tools, this simple little life." She said the word simple like it was a disease. "I provide for us," he said, his voice quiet. "We have a good life." "A good life?" This time the laugh was louder. It was incredulous, laced with a cruelty that physically hurt him. "Eamon, my friends' husbands are closing multi-million-dollar deals. They're flying to Dubai for the weekend. They have vision, ambition. What do you have? A pension plan and a favorite pair of work boots?" The reference to his worn, $280 Red Wing boots by the back door felt like a deliberate, targeted jab. He had resoled them 3 times. "What is in the portfolio, Aria?" he asked, his gaze falling back to the expensive leather case on the counter. She slid it toward him. "That's from my attorney. I've filed for divorce." The words hung in the air heavier than the silence that followed. Divorce. The word itself felt foreign, something that happened to other people in other houses. He felt his throat tighten. He didn't open the portfolio. He couldn't. "Why?" he managed to ask, the single word feeling like a piece of gravel he had to force out. Aria picked an invisible piece of lint from her blazer. She looked past him, out the window at the rainy street, as if she were already somewhere else. Because I want more. I deserve more. I've outgrown this, Eamon. I've outgrown you. She finally looked back at him, her eyes sweeping over his solid frame, his simple clothes, his work-roughened hands. A small, dismissive smile touched her lips. It was the most devastating expression he had ever seen. "Let's be honest," she said, her voice dropping to a confidential, cutting whisper. "I'm way out of your league. I always have been. And I'm finally ready to be free." That was the line. The one that severed the last thread of their 8 years together. It wasn't just a breakup. It was an erasure, a judgment. He wasn't just being left. He was being deemed unworthy. He stood there in his quiet, comfortable kitchen, a ghost in his own life, while the woman he loved looked at him like he was a dusty piece of furniture she was finally getting rid of. And in that moment, Eamon, the man who owned 14 oilfield service companies and a portfolio valued at just over $500 million, felt utterly and completely worthless. He had no idea how wrong he was. The facade of their life had been meticulously constructed, but only he knew it was a one-way mirror. From her side, she saw a simple, transparent existence. From his, he saw everything. Their life was a collection of domestic scenes, each one tagged with a price that told two very different stories. On Saturday mornings, Eamon would be up at dawn. He'd put on a pot of coffee, the $12 bag of Heb Cafe au lait, not the fancy stuff Aria liked, and head out to the detached garage he'd converted into a workshop. The garage itself was a microcosm of his hidden life. To Aria, it was just a dusty space filled with Eamon's junk. To him, it was a sanctuary of order. A $15,000 array of snap-on tools hung on a perfectly organized pegboard. A Miller TIG welder, a $7,500 piece of equipment, sat in the corner, covered by a simple canvas tarp. He'd spend hours out there, rebuilding the carburetor for his neighbor's ancient lawnmower or fabricating a new wrought iron gate for their own garden. The sparks from his grinder, a silent, glittering fireworks show no one else saw. Aria would wake up around 9 a.m., wrap herself in a $450 silk robe, and come downstairs expecting her own special coffee made with a $600 Breville espresso machine and beans from a local roaster that cost $28 a pound. "Eamon, did you remember to get the Ethiopian Yirgacheffe?" she'd ask, wrinkling her nose at the smell of his simpler brew. "It's on the counter, babe," he'd say, walking in from the garage, wiping grease from his hands with a blue shop towel. She'd shrink away. "Don't touch the countertops with those hands," she'd chide gently, but with an edge. "I just had them cleaned." Those were the same $4,000 quartz countertops he had personally sourced and installed, saving them over $3,000 in labor, a fact he never mentioned. The money he saved went into a joint savings account, the same one she was now targeting. Their evenings were a study in contrast. He'd come home from his job, his truck a 2018 Ford F-150 that was technically a company vehicle, though it was registered to an LLC she'd never heard of. It was a practical work truck, its bed scratched, its cab smelling faintly of the West Texas dust he deliberately didn't clean out. He'd kick off his steel-toed boots at the door and change into a pair of comfortable jeans and a t-shirt. Aria, who worked part-time as a gallery consultant for a small, chic space in the Arts District, would talk about her day. It was a world of wealthy patrons and eccentric artists. "You'll never guess who came in today," she'd say, pouring herself a glass of $90 Chardonnay. "Beverly Radcliffe. Her husband just sold his tech startup for $100 million. She bought a sculpture for $75,000 without even blinking." She would sigh, a delicate, frustrated sound. "It must be nice to just not have to worry." Eamon would nod, listening. He never said that the monthly dividend payment from just one of his smaller LLCs, a water reclamation plant in Midland, was more than the price of that sculpture. He'd just ask, How was the rest of your day? He played the part of the dutiful, simple husband. He packed his own lunch every morning in a beat-up igloo cooler he'd had for a decade. A turkey sandwich on whole wheat, an apple, and a bottle of water. It was the lunch of a man who makes $72,400 a year. It kept the illusion alive. Meanwhile, Arya would spend $25 on a salad and a green juice for her lunch, charging it to their joint credit card. He never complained. He just paid the bill at the end of the month, the $6,000 balance, a mix of her expensive tastes and their shared household expenses. One particular memory stood out to him now. It was their anniversary, a few months before the divorce papers. He had made reservations at Grace, one of Fort Worth's most exclusive restaurants. He'd worn his best suit, a custom-tailored piece that had cost him $5,000 but looked understated. She had worn a stunning backless red dress, a $2,400 design from a boutique she loved. They were seated next to a table of men in loud, expensive suits, talking about oil and gas leases. One of them, a man with a booming voice and a massive gold watch, was holding court. Arya was captivated, listening to their talk of drilling rights and futures markets. "That's a real man," she had whispered to Eamon, her eyes shining. "A player. Someone who makes things happen." Eamon looked over at the man. He recognized him. He was a small-time operator who had tried to buy one of Eamon's subsidiary companies last year. Eamon's holding firm had rejected the offer as laughably low. The man's entire net worth was probably less than the value of the equipment on a single one of Eamon's work sites. Eamon just took a sip of his water. "He seems confident," was all he said. Later that night, back in their beautiful Mistletoe Heights home, a $450,000 property he had paid for in cash through a trust. Though the county records were shielded, and he let her believe they had a conventional mortgage, she had been distant. "Don't you ever want more, Eamon?" she'd asked, looking at him with an expression that mingled pity and frustration. "Don't you want to be one of those men?" "I'm happy with what we have," he'd replied, and it was the truth. He was happy with her, with their home, with the quiet life he had built for them. She had sighed and rolled away from him in their king-sized bed, a bed with a $3,500 mattress she had picked out. The space between them had felt as wide and cold as the plains of West Texas. He saw it all, the dollar-tag details of her dissatisfaction, the way she measured his worth against the flashy wealth of others. He saw it, and he kept his own counsel, maintaining the facade. He thought it was what she needed to feel secure, to not be burdened by the complexities of his real life. He thought he was protecting her. He never imagined she would see his quiet strength as weakness, his deliberate simplicity as a lack of ambition. He never imagined she saw him as a stepping stone she was now ready to kick away. The cruelty did not arrive all at once. It was a slow, escalating campaign, each new act of betrayal another layer of ice forming over the memory of their shared life. The outrage accumulated in Eamon's chest, a silent gathering pressure. The first official blow came a week after her announcement. It was a Saturday morning. Eamon was in the front yard, methodically pulling weeds from the flower beds that lined the walkway. A sleek white BMW 3 Series, a car worth about $43,000, pulled up to the curb. A man in a cheap-looking but sharply pressed suit got out. He was holding a large manila envelope. "Eamon Jabari?" the man asked, his tone bored. "That's me," Eamon said, standing up and brushing dirt from his jeans. The man handed him the envelope. "You've been served." He turned and got back into his car without another word. Eamon stood on his lawn, the crisp autumn air suddenly feeling cold. He opened the envelope. Inside was the official petition for divorce, filed in Tarrant County. Attached was a letter from Arya's attorney, a man named Marcus Thorne. The letter was a masterpiece of condescending legal jargon. It outlined Arya's demands. She wanted the house. the marital residence, arguing that she had grown accustomed to the neighborhood and had deep community ties. She wanted permanent alimony of $3,000 per month, citing her limited earning capacity and the lifestyle established during the marriage. And she wanted half of their liquid assets, which Thorne's letter confidently valued at approximately $224,000, held in a joint savings and brokerage account. The house he had paid for in cash. Alimony from a man she believed made $72,400 a year. It was preposterous. It was insulting. But most of all, it was a clear signal of her intent. She wasn't just leaving him. She was planning to strip him bare, leaving him with nothing but the dirt under his fingernails. He folded the papers neatly and went back to his weeding. His movements were calm, deliberate. Inside, a cold fire was beginning to burn. The second wave came via phone call. It was 2 days later, at 8:17 p.m. He was in his workshop, carefully cleaning a set of antique woodworking planes he'd bought at an estate sale. His phone buzzed. It was Arya. He hesitated, then answered, putting the call on speaker. "What do you want, Arya?" he asked. "I want to know why you haven't signed the papers yet," she snapped. Her voice was sharp, impatient. "Marcus said you were served on Saturday. Just sign them, Eamon. Don't make this difficult." "It's a little more complicated than just signing," he said, his voice even. "You're asking for the house." She scoffed. The sound crackled through the speaker. "Of course I'm asking for the house. Where else am I supposed to live? You can get a cheap apartment in the North Side or something. That's more your speed anyway, isn't it?" The North Side, the historic, working-class heart of Fort Worth. The place where his own grandfather, a proud black man who worked at the Swift and Kerber meatpacking plant for 40 years, had raised his family. She said it like it was a slum. "And the alimony, Arya, on a $72,000 salary? Don't be so dramatic. You'll manage. Or you could finally get a real job. You know, my friend Jessica's husband just got promoted to senior vice president. He makes $400,000 a year. That's what ambition looks like." There was a pause. When she spoke again, her voice was laced with venom. "Finally, I'm free to be with someone who matters, Eamon. Someone who isn't covered in rig dust." He heard a man's voice in the background, muffled but clear. "Is that him? Tell him to hurry up." Arya's tone shifted, becoming syrupy and false. "I have to go, Eamon. Just sign the papers. It's better for everyone." She hung up. He stood motionless in the quiet of his workshop, the scent of oil and old wood filling his senses. Someone who matters. The words echoed in the space around him. He had built a $500 million empire from nothing, silently, meticulously, while playing the part of a simple man for her, and she was leaving him for someone who mattered. The irony was so bitter it tasted like rust. He took a deep breath, picked up a soft cloth, and went back to polishing his tools. Each stroke was measured, controlled. A storm was building inside him, but on the surface, there was only a dead, chilling calm. The public humiliation was the third, and perhaps cruelest, cut. It happened at Central Market on a Sunday afternoon. Eamon was in the produce section deciding between organic kale and regular. It was a simple, mundane task. Then he heard her laugh. That bright, tinkling laugh he had once loved, now a sound that set his teeth on edge. He turned. There she was, standing near the artisanal cheese counter. She was with a tall, handsome man with perfectly coiffed hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He wore a ridiculously expensive-looking watch. A Panerai, Eamon noted, probably a $9,000 model, and a cashmere sweater that likely cost more than Eamon's entire wardrobe. Arya was clinging to his arm, looking up at him with adoration. She was wearing a flowing white dress, looking every bit the part of the wealthy man's partner. Their eyes met across a display of overpriced olives. For a moment, A flicker of panic crossed her face. Then it was gone, replaced by a mask of cool superiority. She whispered something to the man, and then, to Eamon's disbelief, she steered him directly toward him. "Well, look who it is," she said, her voice loud enough for several shoppers to turn their heads. "Eamon? What a surprise?" Eamon simply nodded. "Arya." The man beside her looked Eamon up and down, his gaze lingering on Eamon's simple polo shirt and jeans. The assessment was quick and dismissive. "Damien, this is Eamon," Arya said, her tone dripping with condescension. She made a small gesture with her hand. "My soon-to-be ex. He works in the oil fields." Damien, the real estate developer she had mentioned, gave Eamon a tight, insincere smile and a limp handshake. "Tough line of work," he said, his voice oozing faux sympathy. "Arya tells me you're a real hands-on guy." The insult was clear. Hands-on meant poor. It meant blue-collar. It meant not like him. "Something like that," Eamon replied, his voice level. He pulled his hand back. "Well," Arya said brightly, "we were just picking up some things for a dinner party tonight, at Damien's new condo over by TCU. The views are just incredible." She squeezed Damien's arm. "We should go, darling. It was interesting seeing you, Eamon." They walked away, leaving Eamon standing by a bin of avocados. He could feel the eyes of other shoppers on him. He felt stripped bare, labeled, and discarded in the middle of a grocery store. He hadn't just been replaced. He'd been turned into a punchline, a cautionary tale. The simple, dusty husband left behind for the man with the $9,000 watch. That night, the texts started. They were like a volley of poison darts. 10:15 p.m. Just sign the papers, Eamon? This is getting pathetic. 10:47 p.m. Damien thinks you're being ridiculous. He said a man with any self-respect would just walk away. You can't afford a real fight anyway. 11:30 p.m. Are you really going to try and fight me for the house? The house I made a home? You have no shame. Eamon read each message. He didn't reply. He saved each one, creating a new folder on his phone. He labeled it evidence. Each cruel word, each casual dismissal, was another brick in the wall he was building around his heart. It was also another piece of ammunition. Arya and her lawyer thought they were fighting a simple man with a simple life. They had no idea they had just declared war on an empire. While Arya's attacks grew more brazen, Eamon retreated into a state of strategic silence. On the outside, he was the picture of a man adrift and defeated. On the inside, he was a general preparing for battle. The period of playing dumb was the most difficult, a masterclass in restraint that shredded his nerves while sharpening his resolve. His first move was to secure his own counsel. He didn't go to a local Fort Worth family lawyer. He drove to Dallas, to a gleaming glass tower in the Arts District. There, on the 45th floor, were the offices of Serrano and Cruz, a firm known for its discretion and its ferocity in high-stakes corporate litigation. He had been referred to Elena de la Cruz, a senior partner whose reputation was legendary. She was known for dismantling complex financial cases with the precision of a surgeon. Ms. de la Cruz was a formidable woman in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and hair styled in elegant, silver-threaded locks that were coiled into a crown. Her office was minimalist and immaculate, with a single, stunning abstract painting on the wall and a view that stretched all the way back toward Fort Worth. Eamon sat across from her at a large glass desk. He wore his usual work attire, clean but simple. He looked like a man completely out of his depth. "Mr. Jabari," she began, her voice calm and measured, "my paralegal gave me the basics of your wife's petition. She's claiming half of your marital assets, the residence, and significant alimony." "That's correct," Eamon said quietly. "And your income is, according to this, $72,400 a year." She looked at him over the top of her half-moon glasses. a silent question in her eyes. Eamon nodded. He pushed a thin file across the desk. It contained his W-2 from Trinity Field Services, their joint bank statements showing the $224,000 balance, and the deed to the Mistletoe Heights house, which was held in a blind trust. This is what my wife and her attorney believe to be the full picture. Ms. De La Cruz reviewed the documents. They're being aggressive. The alimony demand is disproportionate. They're likely assuming you'll be intimidated into a quick settlement to give them the house and a lump sum. Eamon let the silence hang in the air for a moment. Then, he reached down beside his chair and lifted a heavy, 4-inch thick binder onto her desk. The binder was plain black, with a simple label on the spine. Auth, LLC. And this, Eamon said, is the rest of the picture. Elena de la Cruz opened the binder. The first page was a simple organizational chart. At the top was a single box, Odessa Trinity Holdings, LLC. Branching down from it were 14 other boxes, each the name of a different limited liability company: Permian Water Solutions, Eagle Ford Logistics, Kingston Pipe and Supply, and 11 others. Her professionally placid expression didn't change, but Eamon saw a flicker of intense focus in her eyes. She turned the page, and then another. She saw asset registers, fleet manifests, real estate portfolios across 6 counties, statements of capital accounts. She paused on the summary page, a single sheet that listed the consolidated net asset value of all 14 companies. Her finger traced the final number at the bottom of the page, 512-418-2914. She slowly closed the binder. She took off her glasses, polished them with a cloth from her desk, and put them back on. She looked at Eamon, really looked at him. For the first time, the defeated blue-collar man was gone. In his place sat someone else entirely. "Mr. Jabari," she said, her voice now holding a note of profound respect, "I believe we have a great deal to discuss. Please, start from the beginning." His next step was a carefully orchestrated phone call with Aria. He made sure to call her from his truck, knowing that under Texas law, as a party to the conversation, his consent was all that was required to legally record it. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice impatient. "What, Eamon?" He pitched his voice to sound weary, broken. "Aria, I got the papers. I've been looking at them. I can't do this." "Can't do what? Sign your name?" she sneered. "I can't afford to lose the house," he said, letting a note of desperation creep in. "That's everything. I'll have nothing. Where will I go?" He could almost hear her smile through the phone. It was the sound of victory. "That's not my problem, Eamon. You should have been more ambitious. Maybe if you'd spent less time tinkering in that dusty garage and more time networking, you wouldn't be in this position." "The alimony," he stammered. $3,000 a month. My take-home pay is only about $4,000 after taxes. I won't be able to live." "Then get a second job," she said, her voice cold and final. "You're a big, strong man. You can haul pipes on the weekend or something. I have to go. Damien is taking me to look at a new BMW, a 5 Series this time. My reward for finally getting my life on track." She hung up. Eamon saved the recording. Her words, dripping with contempt, were now a digital file, a piece of evidence more damning than any financial statement. It was proof of her state of mind, her intentions, her utter lack of compassion. It was proof that this was never about an amicable separation. It was a hostile takeover of his life, or what she perceived his life to be. He continued to play the part, complying with every initial request from her lawyer, Marcus Thorne. He filled out the standard financial affidavit, listing only his $72,400 salary, his 2018 F-150, and their joint accounts. He let his own temporary legal counsel, a local lawyer he hired just for show, send meek, pleading emails to Thorne asking for a more equitable arrangement. Thorne, smelling blood in the water, became even more arrogant. "My client is being more than generous," he wrote in one email, which was promptly forwarded to Ms. de la Cruz. "Mr. Jabari is attempting to cling to a lifestyle his income cannot sustain post-divorce. We suggest he accept the offer before my client loses her patience, and we are forced to litigate, a process he can ill afford." Eamon read the email in Miss de la Cruz's office. He felt the familiar surge of cold anger, but his face remained a mask of placid stillness. He was baiting the trap. He was handing them the rope, and he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that they were about to use it to hang themselves. The time for playing dumb was almost over. The discovery phase was about to begin. Tuesday, November 28th, 2:15 p.m. The air in the conference room at Thorne & Associates was stale, smelling of weak coffee and anxiety. The firm was located in a modest 3-story building on the outskirts of downtown Fort Worth, a far cry from the soaring glass towers of Dallas. Marcus Thorne, Aria's attorney, prided himself on being a bulldog for his clients, but today he felt a nagging unease. Aria sat beside him looking bored. She scrolled through her phone, occasionally sighing with impatience. She was dressed for her new life, in a cream-colored cashmere sweater that cost at least $900 and sharply creased white trousers. Her nails, perfectly manicured, tapped a staccato rhythm on the polished mahogany table. "Is this going to take much longer, Marcus?" she asked, not looking up from her phone. "I have a facial at 4. "Just a few more minutes, Aria," Thorne said, trying to keep the irritation out of his voice. "We have to go through the discovery responses. It's standard procedure." He had, on a whim and a nagging professional instinct, issued a broad subpoena to the Texas Comptroller's office for any corporate filings linked to Eamon Jabari. He didn't expect to find anything. At most, he figured, maybe the man had a little side hustle, an undeclared handyman business that might be worth a few thousand extra dollars they could squeeze out of him. The responses had arrived an hour ago, a link to a secure digital portal. His paralegal, a young woman named Brenda, clicked open the portal. The first document was innocuous: the Articles of Incorporation for Trinity Field Services, LLC, the company that issued Eamon's W-2. Thorne nodded, expected. "See, he owns the company he works for," Thorne said to Aria with a smirk. "Probably just a way to manage his taxes. Let's see what it's worth." Brenda clicked through the associated financial statements. The company's net value was minimal, holding only enough cash to cover its operating expenses and Eamon's modest salary. It owned no significant assets. "Pathetic," Aria muttered, glancing at the screen. "All that effort for $72,000 a year." But then Brenda's brow furrowed. "Wait a second," she said. "There's another filing here. Trinity Field Services is listed as a wholly owned subsidiary of Odessa Trinity Holdings, LLC. "What's that?" Thorne asked, leaning forward. "I don't know," Brenda said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She ran a new search. A new screen populated. It was an organizational chart, auto-generated by the state's database. At the top was the box for Odessa Trinity Holdings. And connected below it, like a spider web, were lines leading to other boxes. Not one or two. 14 of them. What is all this?" Aria asked, finally putting her phone down. The boredom in her voice had been replaced by confusion. Thorne's face had gone pale. He stared at the names: Kingston Pipe and Supply, Permian Water Solutions, Eagle Ford Logistics, West Texas Fleet Management. He recognized some of them. They were small to mid-sized players in the oil patch, companies that handled the dirty, unglamorous work of the energy sector, hauling water, renting equipment, providing on-site services. "Get me the asset valuations for the parent company," Thorne croaked, his voice suddenly dry. Brenda's hands trembled slightly as she typed. The system churned for a moment. Then, A consolidated financial summary appeared on the large monitor at the end of the room. Numbers. Rows and rows of numbers. Asset columns. Liability columns. Equity columns. Arya squinted at the screen. "I don't understand. What are all those zeros?" Thorne didn't answer. He had stood up and walked to the monitor, his finger tracing the final number at the bottom right of the screen. Total net equity, 512,418,209, 14 $500 million. The room went completely silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the computer and the distant wail of a siren on the street below. Arya stared at the number. She blinked. She looked at Thorne, then back at the screen. Her perfectly made-up face seemed to crumble. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her deep brown skin looking ashen. "No," she whispered. "No, that's a mistake. A typo." Thorne stumbled back to his chair and sank into it. He ran a hand over his face. The bulldog was gone. In his place was a man who had just realized he'd brought a knife to a nuclear war. The man he had been bullying. The man he had called pathetic and unambitious. The man whose life he was trying to ruin for $100,000 and a house was one of the wealthiest men in Texas. "It's not a typo, Arya," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "It's a holding company, a roll-up. He's been buying up service companies, silently, for years." Arya's breath hitched. She was looking at the screen with a kind of horror, as if it were a monster. The life she had mocked, the man she had scorned, the rigged dust she had complained about. It wasn't a sign of failure. It was camouflage. The greatest lie she had ever been told wasn't something Amon had said. It was the entire world he had built around her, a world she had been too blind to see. $500 million, she said, the words barely audible. Her mind was reeling, trying to process the impossible number. The cars, the houses, the trips to Dubai she had dreamed of, they were not just possible. They were a rounding error in his portfolio. She had been married to the king, and she had thrown him away because she thought he was a pauper. Thorne's mind was racing, but not with excitement. It was racing with pure, unadulterated terror. He had filed an aggressive, predatory petition against a man with functionally unlimited resources. He had insulted him. His client had belittled him, humiliated him, and recorded herself doing it. He was sure of it. The lawsuit he had initiated was about to turn on them with the force of a tidal wave. "Oh, God," Thorne muttered, loosening his tie. "What have we done?" Arya didn't answer. She just stared at the screen, at the impossible number. And for the first time since she had walked into her kitchen and declared herself out of her husband's league, she began to cry. They were not tears of sadness or remorse. They were tears of pure, agonizing loss for the gilded future she had just discovered she'd thrown away. Back in the serene, climate-controlled quiet of the 45th floor, the atmosphere was one of methodical preparation. The discovery of Amon's empire by Arya's legal team was not a surprise. It was a planned event, a trigger. Now Amon and Elena de la Cruz were preparing for the inevitable fallout. "Thorne's office has been silent for 48 hours, Ms. de la Cruz stated, looking at a file on her desk. "Since they accessed the comptroller's database. They're in a state of shock. They're trying to figure out their next move." Amon sat opposite her, his posture unchanged. He was calm. The storm of emotion he'd felt, the humiliation, the anger, had been forged into something hard and sharp. Resolve. "They'll think they've hit the lottery," he said. "Arya will believe she's now entitled to half of it." "She will," Ms. de la Cruz agreed, "and she will be wrong. This is where we dismantle their case before it even begins. The foundation of our argument is unimpeachable, the separate property doctrine." She pulled out a new set of binders. these far more detailed than the one Eamon had first brought her. They were meticulously organized, with color-coded tabs and highlighted sections. "It begins here," she said, opening the first binder. "Exhibit A, the Jabari Family Heritage Trust." She slid a document across the table. It was the original trust agreement, dated May 12, 2017. This trust was established with a $1.5 million inheritance from your grandfather, a full 18 months before your marriage to Aria. This is the seed. Crucially, it is premarital and therefore, indisputably, your separate property. Ayman nodded. He remembered his grandfather, a man of profound dignity who had saved every extra dollar from his job at the packing plant. That inheritance had felt like a sacred duty. Now the tree that grew from that seed, Ms. de la Cruz continued, opening a second binder labeled Capital Flows. Every single acquisition made by Odessa Trinity Holdings was funded directly from this trust. We have the wire transfer records for every transaction. She pointed to the first entry. February 2018. You'd been married for 3 months. Oth acquires Kingston Pipe and Supply for $850,000. She produced the bank statement from the Heritage Trust showing the debit, and the corresponding statement from the acquisition account showing the credit. There was a clean, unbroken line. No marital funds were used. Your salary from Trinity Field Services, the only community money, was deposited into your joint checking account with Aria. It never once touched the capital accounts of OTH or its subsidiaries. They spent the next 2 hours going through it, LLC by LLC. It was a masterwork of corporate structuring, designed by Ayman from the very beginning to maintain a perfect wall between his personal life and his business empire. The roll-up strategy was patient and brilliant. He bought small, family-owned service companies during downturns in the oil market, companies that were distressed but had good equipment and experienced crews. He paid in cash, streamlined their operations, and integrated them into his growing logistics network. He never took a large salary. He never took a flashy dividend. He reinvested every dollar of profit back into the next acquisition. His lifestyle remained that of a $72,400 a year manager, because that was the only money he ever allowed to cross the barrier into his home life. The total valuation as of this morning's report is $512.4 million, Ms. de la Cruz said, closing the final binder. And every single cent of it is traceable back to the premarital seed trust. Under the Texas Family Code, it is your sole and separate property, all of it. Ayman looked at the mountain of evidence they had compiled. It was more than just a legal defense. It was the secret history of his life for the past 8 years. "So what's the strategy?" he asked. "Full aggressive transparency," she replied, a faint, confident smile on her lips. "We are not going to hide this. We are going to bury them with it. Thorne will likely refile, amending his petition to claim half the empire. He'll argue for commingling, or that your labor during the marriage, your time, toil, and talent contributed to the growth of the separate property, entitling the community to reimbursement. My time, toil, and talent were compensated by my $72,000 salary," Ayman stated flatly, "a salary the community already received and benefited from." "Precisely," Ms. de la Cruz affirmed. "We will preempt his argument. My office will draft a motion for summary judgment, declaring the entirety of OTH and its subsidiaries as your separate property. We will attach every document we've just reviewed. It will be thousands of pages. It will be irrefutable." She leaned forward. "And then we make them an offer. We offer to settle on the original marital estate only. She gets her half of the $224,000. In exchange, she signs a non-disclosure agreement so airtight that if she ever breathes a word of Odessa Trinity Holdings to anyone, the financial penalties will be catastrophic." Ayman was silent for a long moment. He thought of Arya's cruel words, her dismissive laugh in the grocery store, the contempt in her voice on the phone. The part of him that was still bleeding wanted to drag her through a public court battle, to let the world see her for what she was. But the other part of him, the calm, strategic part that had built an empire in silence, knew that was not the way. A public fight would expose his business to unwanted scrutiny. It was messy. The best victory was a quiet one, a clinical one. "No trial," Ayman said finally. "We settle, but on our terms, exactly as you've laid out." Ms. de la Cruz nodded, a look of approval in her eyes. "They'll receive our motion and the settlement offer on Monday morning. I suspect Mr. Thorne will advise his client to accept it. He has no other choice. He's facing a legal and financial annihilation he is completely unprepared for." The plan was set. The evidence was compiled. The quiet, simple man from Mistletoe Heights was about to reveal the true nature of his power. It would not be with a shout, but with the silent, crushing weight of paper. The strike came on a cold, gray Wednesday morning in a neutral mediation suite on the 50th floor of a skyscraper in downtown Dallas. The glass walls of the conference room offered a panoramic view of the city, but inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The glass tower, with its imposing height and cold facade, felt symbolic of the emotional distance that now separated everyone at the table. Ayman sat on one side, flanked by Elena de la Cruz. He was dressed in the same $5,000 custom suit he'd worn for his anniversary dinner, a quiet statement of the power he had always possessed. His face was a mask of still, holding LLC composure. He looked directly across the table, but his eyes seemed to be focused on a point far beyond the room. On the other side sat Arya and her lawyer, Marcus Thorne. The change in their demeanor was stark. Thorne, who had been so arrogant in his emails, now looked haggard and pale. His suit seemed to hang off him, and he fidgeted with a pen, unable to keep his hands still. Arya was a statue of disbelief. The defiant, superior woman from Central Market was gone. She wore a simple black dress, but it couldn't hide the frantic panic in her eyes. She stared at Ayman, her expression a desperate, pleading question. A neutral mediator, a retired judge, sat at the head of the table, his presence a formality. Everyone knew this wasn't a negotiation. It was a surrender, Ms. de la Cruz began. Her voice was calm, devoid of triumph or malice. It was the voice of pure, inescapable fact. "Good morning. We are here today to resolve the divorce petition of Jabari versus Jabari. My client, Mr. Jabari, is prepared to offer a final settlement." Thorne cleared his throat. "Ms. de la Cruz, my client's circumstances have materially changed since the initial filing. We have uncovered significant assets that were not disclosed." He was trying to sound forceful, but his voice was thin. "There were no undisclosed marital assets, Mr. Thorne." Ms. de la Cruz corrected him gently. "What you uncovered, through your own discovery process, was my client's separate property. Property which we are now prepared to fully document for you." With a quiet nod from her, a paralegal entered the room and placed a stack of bound documents in front of Thorne. It was a copy of the motion for summary judgment, thousands of pages thick. "You will find in there," she continued, "the complete financial history of Odessa Trinity Holdings, LLC, and its 14 subsidiary companies. You will find the documentation for the premarital Jabari Family Heritage Trust, established in 2017. And you will find an unbroken chain of evidence, from wire transfers to capital account statements, proving that 100% of the entity's $512 million valuation is derived from that separate, premarital trust." Thorne opened the top binder. His eyes scanned the first page, then the second. He licked his lips, his professional facade cracking under the sheer, overwhelming weight of the evidence. He had spent the last week desperately searching for a loophole, a commingled account, a single dollar of marital funds that had crossed the line. he had found nothing. Iman's financial discipline had been absolute. My client's time, his toil, his talent during the marriage, Thorne began, reciting the standard legal argument like a Hail Mary. Ms. de la Cruz cut him off, her voice still quiet, but now edged with steel. Mr. Jabari's time, toil, and talent were compensated at a rate of $72,400 per year, a salary paid to him by one of his own companies, and a salary which was deposited in its entirety into the community bank account that he shared with your client. The community has already been compensated for his labor. There is no further claim. The room was silent. The retired judge watched, impassive. He had seen this before, a clean kill. Arya could no longer contain herself. Her voice, when she spoke, was a choked whisper. You lied to me. She was staring at Aemon, her face a mask of betrayal. For 8 years, you lied about everything. Aemon finally moved. He turned his head and looked directly at her. His expression was not angry, not hateful. It was something far worse. It was empty. He felt nothing but a vast, quiet pity. I never lied to you, Arya, he said, his voice level and low. I lived the life I showed you. I packed my lunch. I fixed the sink. I paid the bills with the money I told you I made. You were the one who decided that life wasn't good enough. You were the one who looked at that life and found it lacking. He paused, letting his words hang in the air. Then he delivered the final, devastating blow, a callback to the night that had started it all. You said you were out of my league, Arya, he said, his voice dropping slightly. I suppose the court will decide what league that is. Her face went white. Her own words, thrown back at her in this sterile, silent room, hit her with the force of a physical slap. She crumpled in her chair, a sob escaping her lips. Ms. de la Cruz slid a single sheet of paper and a cashier's check across the table. This is our offer. Mr. Jabari will not contest the division of the known marital assets. The total is $224,691. Your client's 50% share is $112,345.50. That check is for the full amount. Thorne looked at the check, then at the paper next to it. It was the settlement agreement. The agreement stipulates, Ms. de la Cruz continued, that in exchange for this payment, your client will relinquish all claims to the marital residence and any form of alimony. Furthermore, she will sign the attached non-disclosure agreement regarding all of Mr. Jabari's business entities. The penalties for violation are severe, including forfeiture of the settlement funds and liability for damages up to $10 million. It was an execution, clean, swift, and absolute. Arya looked from the check to Aemon's impassive face. The pleading returned to her eyes. Aemon, please, she begged, her voice cracking. We can fix this. I didn't mean it. I love you. I was just confused. He just shook his head, a slow, final gesture. It's too late for that, Arya. Thorne leaned over and whispered frantically to her. Sign it, Arya. For God's sake, sign it. There's nothing left to fight for. He's got us. He's got everything. Tears streamed down her face as she picked up the pen. Her hand shook so badly she could barely hold it. She looked at the signature line, then one last time at the man she had thrown away. The man who held the world in his hands, a world she could have shared if not for her own pride and cruelty. With a final shuddering gasp, she signed her name, surrendering her past, her present, and the unimaginable future she had just lost. The consequences of that signature cascaded through Arya's life with brutal efficiency. The downfall was not a single event, but a series of quiet, humiliating collapses, each one a direct result of her own choices. The world she had been so desperate to enter slammed its doors on her, one by one. First, there was the money. The check for $112,345.50 seemed like a fortune to the woman who thought her husband made $72,000 a year. But to the woman who had just seen a $512 million valuation on a screen, it felt like an insult. It was a pittance, a crumb from a banquet she had been locked out of. Reality set in quickly. She had already signed a 1-year lease on the luxury condo near TCU, a place she'd chosen to impress Damien and her friends. The rent was $3,200 a month, a $2,500 security deposit, and first month's rent were due immediately. That was $5,700 gone before she even moved in. She had to furnish it, and her taste for designer furniture quickly ate another $30,000. Her lawyer, Marcus Thorne, presented her with his final bill, $22,500 for his services, a fee he had inflated believing he was tapping into a much larger settlement. After paying it, her fortune had dwindled to just over $54,000. It was enough to live on for a year if she was careful, but Aria didn't know how to be careful. Then, there was Damien. The handsome real estate developer with the $9,000 watch had been a constant, supportive presence when he believed Aria was about to become a wealthy divorcee. He had helped her pick out the condo, talked about trips to Aspen, and whispered promises of a life of leisure. The day after the settlement, she called him, her voice shaky but hopeful. "It's over," she said. "I'm free." "That's great, baby," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "So did he settle? What's the number? Are we celebrating tonight at Del Frisco's?" She hesitated. "I got a settlement. About $100,000. The silence on the other end of the line was long and cold. $100,000? He finally said, all the warmth gone from his voice. "That's it? After all that?" "I thought you said he had a nice house, savings." "It's complicated," she stammered. "But it's enough to get started." "Yeah, well, listen, Aria," he said. His tone suddenly rushed. "Something's come up. A deal in Austin. I'm going to be tied up for a few weeks. I'll call you when I get back." He never called. She saw him a month later on a society blog, his arm around another woman, the daughter of a Dallas billionaire. Damien wasn't interested in a partner. He was looking for an investment. When her stock crashed, he divested. Her social circle evaporated next. The friends who had cheered her on, who had told her she was too good for him, fell silent. The invitations to brunch and charity luncheons stopped coming. She tried calling Jessica, the friend whose husband was a senior vice president. Jessica was evasive. "Oh, it's just a crazy time at work for Bill," she said. "We're just so busy." Aria understood the code. She was no longer an asset. Her proximity to Amon had been a source of potential. Perhaps he could be influenced. Perhaps he could invest. Now she was just a cautionary tale, the woman who fumbled the bag. Her humiliation was contagious, and no one wanted to catch it. Within 6 months, her savings were nearly gone. The reality of her situation hit her with the force of a physical blow. She was forced to do something she hadn't done in a decade: look for a full-time job. With a limited resume consisting of part-time gallery work, her options were bleak. She eventually found a position as a receptionist at a large dental practice in the suburbs. The pay was $45,000 a year. After taxes, her monthly take-home was less than the rent on her luxury condo. The final, crushing indignity was the car. The new BMW 5 Series she had dreamed of was an impossible fantasy. She had to sell some of the designer furniture from her condo just to make a down payment on a used 2015 Hyundai Elantra with 80,000 miles on it. The car was sensible, reliable, and utterly devoid of status. Every time she got behind the wheel, the smell of its cheap plastic interior was a reminder of everything she had lost. One night, sitting alone in her half-empty condo, the silence pressing in on her, she broke. She scrolled through her phone and found Eamon's number. She hit call, Her heart pounding, it went to voicemail. "Eamon," she began, her voice a raw, desperate sob. "Eamon, please. I made a mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake. I was a fool. I was so stupid. I see that now. Please, just talk to me. Don't do this to me. To us. We can go back. I can change. I swear I can change." Eamon was in his quiet house in Mistletoe Heights when the voicemail arrived. He listened to it once, his face impassive. He heard the raw pain in her voice, the desperate pleading, the chaotic storm of her regret. A flicker of the old pity, the old affection, stirred in his chest. He remembered the woman he had married, not the cruel stranger she had become. For a moment he felt a pang of sadness for her. Then he thought of her words. "Way out of your league. Someone who matters. You can haul pipes on the weekend." He thought of the calculated cruelty, the public humiliation, the utter disdain for the man she thought he was. He realized she wasn't mourning him. She was mourning the money. His finger hovered over the screen. Then, with a quiet finality, he pressed delete. The storm of her life was no longer his to weather. He was free. 1 year later, sunlight streamed through the large windows of the Mistletoe Heights house, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The house felt different now. It was calmer, more grounded. Arya's expensive, impersonal furniture was gone. In its place were Eamon's things, bookshelves overflowing with volumes on geology and engineering, framed topographical maps of the Permian Basin on the walls, and a comfortable, well-worn leather armchair that faced the garden. The home was no longer a stage for a life. It was the life itself. Eamon had found a new purpose, one that had been quietly growing in his heart for years. He had taken the engine of his empire, OTH, and given it a soul. He established the Odessa Trinity Trade Scholarship, a multi-million-dollar endowment dedicated to the very people his wife had scorned. It provided full-ride scholarships, including tools, housing, and living stipends, for students attending trade schools across Texas. It was for the future welders, diesel mechanics, electricians, and rig technicians, the hands-on people who made the world turn. That afternoon, he stood on the small stage of a community college auditorium in Odessa. The air was filled with the proud murmurs of families. He was dressed simply, in a dark blazer and an open-collared shirt. He looked not like a half-billionaire, but like a man who belonged there. "True wealth isn't found in a stock portfolio or a bank account," he said, his voice steady and warm, carrying through the auditorium. "It's found in a skill. It's found in the ability to build, to fix, to create something real with your own two hands. It's the wealth of character, of resilience, of hard work. That is the legacy this scholarship is meant to honor." He called the name of the first recipient, a young woman named Keisha Johnson, who was starting a program in advanced welding. She was a single mother of 2, and as she walked across the stage, her eyes shining with tears, Eamon saw the same fierce determination he'd seen in his own grandfather. He shook her hand and gave her the certificate. Her 2 small children, a boy and a girl, watched from the front row. After the ceremony, the little girl, who couldn't have been more than 5, shyly approached him. Her hair was done in beautiful braids with colorful beads that clicked softly as she moved. She was holding a piece of folded construction paper. "This is for you," she whispered, holding it out to him. Eamon knelt down to her level. "For me? Thank you." He carefully unfolded the paper. It was a child's drawing rendered in thick, waxy crayon. There was a big yellow sun, a lopsided building labeled school, and 2 figures. One was a woman with a welding mask, sparks flying from her hands. The other was a tall man with a kind smile. The girl had used a rich brown crayon for their skin. She pointed a small finger at the man in the drawing. "That's you," she said. "You helped my mama." Eamon felt a warmth spread through his chest, that no business deal had ever given him. He looked at the drawing, this simple, priceless piece of art. This was real. This mattered. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I will keep this forever." He found his peace not in boardrooms, but in these moments. He found it in the quiet satisfaction of his work, now aligned with a purpose beyond profit. And he found it on Sunday afternoons, walking along the green, winding banks of the Trinity River in Fort Worth. The sun would set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, and he would walk, his mind clear, his heart full. He wasn't lonely. He was whole. He had learned the hardest lesson of his life, that some people will only ever see the dirt on your boots, and never the solid ground you're standing on, or the mountains you're quietly moving. He had been judged by a woman who saw value only in what glittered, and in doing so, she had thrown away a diamond because she thought it was a rock. His empire was secure, his home was his own, but the real victory was the quiet contentment he now felt, a wealth that could never be measured in dollars. We build our lives on what we value. Some build on shifting sands of status and appearance, while others build on the bedrock of character and purpose. Ayman's foundation was never the $500 million. It was the integrity that allowed him to build it in silence, and the wisdom to know what to do with it when he was finally free. The real empire was the one he was now building in the lives of others, one scholarship, one future, one grateful family at a time.